So my name is Fox. I'm going to be walking you guys through a refresher on heat injuries and how we're going to take care of those. For the record, this is not a course that's going to count towards any level of certification or recertification. This is just a in-house refresher so that we know what we're looking at when we are afield. That disclaimer having been said, let's go ahead and get my PowerPoint presentation up and running. All right. So a couple of key points that we're going to go over tonight. We're going to go over resistance and predispositions, the various types of heat injury, signs, symptoms, and of course, treatments. All right, susceptibility factors. Age is one of the biggest. Young children, specifically those probably under the age of 5 to 10, and those over 65, they don't have quite the thermoregulation that teenagers and young adults do. Physical fitness, generally speaking, the more fit you are, the more stress your body can take. That includes extremes of temperatures. Medical conditions, there's several out there that impact heat resistance. The one to take biggest note of is those with thyroid problems. If you're taking Synthroid or have had any kind of reduction to the thyroid gland, you will not tolerate heat as well as those of us who do not have that condition. That's the gland that actually controls the whole show and is the body's thermostat. Acclimatization. If you're used to it, it doesn't hurt as much. That's why usually by about the time we get to September, we're thinking it don't feel so hot anymore. But in the beginning of June, when the first time it hits 100, it's just miserable. This is actually something that the Army and Marine Corps have used. Your first 2 weeks being deployed to anything in the Middle East, your task for the 2 weeks is literally just walk around and get used to being hot. Like, you don't have any other job for that period. And it works. Once they started taking the time to do that, they saw a rather dramatic decrease in the number of heat casualties that they were seeing for those deployments. Other things that are going to impact alcohol consumption. Alcohol consumption, makes you feel warmer to start with, which is why people get silly drunk and then they decide to start taking off their clothes in the wintertime. But it also actually alters how your body handles heat. For one, it does vasodilation, so more blood is on the surface, which is a double-edged sword. Your body's cooling method of sweating works by bringing your blood to the surface, having water there, and the wind carries it away, thus cooling off your blood and letting it come back to the core. You put too much blood up there in too hot a condition, and now basically we've just overridden the effect we were going for with our body's natural radiator. So you're going to be sending blood that's hotter back into the core and making matters a little bit worse. Humidity. Those of you in Houston, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Austin, probably a little bit more than Dallas. But even a little bit of humidity can give a big swing in temperature, or at least the feel real. To that end, this is the NOAA's heat index chart. Lots of numbers, lots of colors. Big takeaway here. Small increases in humidity at higher end temperatures lead to much larger changes in the feel real heat index. Right now, even on a low humidity day, we're waking up and it's near 90. We're already in the orange category. Those days where it starts off, near 95 by 9 a.m., we're already looking at a heat index of 101. Last week, I know we had a heat index of 117 here in Dallas. I did not look at today's, but I imagine it's upwards of 110 still. And you'll notice that as we get above 100 degrees, that 60, 70, 80% humidity, like, they don't even bother plotting out the temperatures because it's literally too hot to do anything safely. So make sure we're watching our humidity, or watching our weather channels and knowing what our relative humidity and heat indexes are, because it's going to give us a better idea of how people are going to be reacting. Minor left turn here in Albuquerque, we're going to talk about sunburns, because it's summertime and it's hot outside, so people, for whatever reason, decide they don't like wearing clothing. A sunburn is still a burn. A sunburn can be severe. You can get grade 2 and grade 3 sunburns. They're rare and they are a problem. Typically with sunburns, we're going to see the reddening skin, moderate pain to touch. You step in the shower with it, it feels like you got a million razor blades going over you. Usually heals on its own in a couple of days, as long as we avoid more burning, more being out in the sun. Best treatment is, of course, prevention. So wear those long sleeves, wear the hat, sunglasses, long pants when possible, anything to keep the sun off of your skin and create that air pocket of cool close to your skin that'll help keep you cooled off. Once it's started, the best thing you can do is now stop the burning process. Go inside, put on clothes, stay in the shade, those kinds of things. Some folks do like to use solar cane and aloe as a pain reliever. That can be quite effective. There's another new product that just recently hit market that I've not had much experience with. It is called Sunburnt. The last part of that being B-U-R-N-T as in Tom. From what I've been reading online, folks have liked the response that they've gotten out of it, and it works as well or better than solar cane. So that is another option to throw at it. For those of you with weak stomachs or who don't like looking at potentially disturbing images, this next slide is a trigger warning for you. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to look away. All right, here we go. That is a 2nd degree sunburn. You can see the blistering there. That is a partial thickness. He's not going to be happy with things. This person should probably go to the ER, have them look at it, because that does look like it's a good 20% of his body or so, because I imagine that goes all the way down his arms. So we've got neck involvement, arm involvement, probably hands. That's a serious situation that we're looking at there. All right. And the triggery slide is gone, so we're back into the usual boring text on screen. We have 3 types of heat injury aside from sunburns. We've got heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. Heat cramps, not a big deal. Heat stroke, that's a life threat. Heat cramps, symptoms, cramping, right there in the name. Plus nausea, some fatigue. Skin may be warm. Skin may have some flushness to it. That's going to be kind of hard to differentiate from sunburn in some cases. Main thing, though, to keep an eye on, though, they're still sweating. So they're warm and they're sweating. This is okay. We can still keep up with this. The body hasn't lost the fight yet. All right. So treatment for heat cramps. We want them to drink water. Gatorade or clear soda can also be given. Just make sure it's chased by water. Avoid ice water. If you give them something that's super cold while they're already rather hot, you can accidentally induce vomiting. I actually watched this happen to a young man when I was in high school. We were outside for an extended period of time. Everybody got real warm. He went over to a drinking fountain, spent a good 30 or 45 seconds drinking some ice cold water. We went back outside, and about 5 minutes later, he threw up water everywhere. So we want to avoid the super cold water. We want something that's cool but not cold. We want to get them into the shade or air conditioning, or at least we want to encourage them to go to shade and air conditioning. We want to loosen any tighter restrictive clothing. So if they've got boots that are pants that are tucked into boots, we want to unblouse that. If they've got Shirt cuffs, we want to open them up. If they're wearing multiple layers, we want to open up some of those layers and or remove them entirely. Offer them a cold towel or compress put on their neck. If you can get blood that's at the surface cooled off and going back through, we can help cool the body off from the inside out. This is the only example of flushed skin that I was able to find on the internet for those of darker skin tones. It's a little hard to see if you're on a phone, but the left side of this man's face is definitely redder than the right half. But it's hard to see even in this very close-up photo. So we cannot rely on flushed skin to be our clinical indicator at a protest or a rally or anything going on outside, at least not on our darker skinned brethren that are out there. Somebody pasty white like me, I'm going to be beet red. You'll know it in a heartbeat. You'll see me a mile away. So we're going to have to look for other indicators. We're going to have to look for behaviors and some other stuff that's going to come up on the next slide. Heat exhaustion. We have the same exact symptoms as heat cramps, but this time we're going to add dizziness, lightheadedness, and if you check, especially their radial pulse, it's going to be weaker and rapid. Skin is probably going to be cool to the touch this time, maybe warm, but more likely cool. They're still sweating. They haven't lost the fight yet. So we're getting worse, but we're not in the danger zone yet. Once again, we need to get them out of the heat. So shade or air conditioning, you may have to help them. They might be dizzy. They can't walk on their own. That dizziness, that bending over, those are going to be our indicators that we're looking for in the field, because they're going to be walking along and then all of a sudden they're not. They're going to be hunched over or taking a knee or throwing up or something like that. So those are going to be what we're looking for. Once we get these folks, oops, back that up a bit. Once we get our heat exhaustion folks out of the heat, they need to stay out of the heat. So if we get them inside to air conditioning, that's where they need to stay for the rest of the day. If we get them into the shade, we need to keep them in the shade until it's safe to move them somewhere else. And then ideally, they need to stay in the air conditioning for the rest of the day. Again, if they have tight clothing or restrictive clothing, we need to remove it, open it up, let them get air on themselves. As long as they have an intact gag reflex, if they're still talking to you, go ahead and give them water. Again, Gatorade or clear soda can be given. We just need to make sure that it's chased by a bottle of water. And in fact, in this case, the Gatorade and clear soda can be a good thing because it's going to help put the salt back that the sweat's been taking away. This time we really need to make sure we avoid anything that's too cold, because now we're much more likely to accidentally induce vomiting. We want to get cold compresses on them if we can, ice packs to them, depending upon what kind of shape they're in and how willing they are, give them an ice pack to stick on their groin. We want to get ice or cold things on the areas with large amounts of blood flow, so our big main arteries, under the arms, at the groin, and on the neck. With these folks, you need to keep an eye on them. Like, they are now your priority because you need to be watching them for signs of mental change. The line between heat exhaustion and heat stroke is very thin. They could already be stepping over it by the time we find them. So keep an eye out on these folks. Make sure that they don't start going through mental changes. For these folks, it would not be a bad plan for them to go to an urgent care or even an ER. Or at the very least, we need to make sure that a friend or family member is aware to keep an eye on them and be prepared to take them to an urgent care or an ER. For these folks, an IV can actually really help them out, especially cooling them off, because we're going to take fluids that are considerably cooler than us, but not yet shock-inducing, and get them inside the body where they can actually cool us off from the inside out. All right. And heat stroke. Again, this is a life-threatening emergency. This can kill you. Heat stroke is defined as hyperthermia. Hyperthermia officially per Mayo Clinic and CDC guidelines starts at a internal core temperature of 104 or greater, confirmed rectally. Now, we're not going to be doing that in the field. I just wanted that information to be there as a so you know. And if you ever take this class for recertification purposes, that is a good test question. Things we're going to be looking for in the field: altered mental status. These folks are going to be disoriented, confused, dizzy, possibly talking nonsense. They're not going to be sweating anymore. Skin is going to be hot and dry. The body is losing the fight. Pulse is going to be fast. Breathing is going to be fast. The body is throwing its last couple bits of ammo at cooling itself off. They may be complaining of headache. They may be unconscious, or they may fall unconscious. We need to get them out of the heat, preferably into air conditioning, but shade will do in a pinch. We need to get the clothing loosened up, opened up. If they still have an intact gag reflex, give them small amounts of water and make sure that they can follow directions. You may have to remind them to swallow. Don't let them chug it. Make sure that they're just taking regular sips every minute or so. Avoid things that are too cold. Again, in this case, if we give them something too cold, we're probably going to induce vomiting, and we really don't want that. For these folks, cold compresses, ice neck, or neck, armpits, and groin. We need to cool them off quickly. Now, for those of you who are like myself, I'm an old Army medic. Back when I first went to combat medic school, they were still teaching what is called ice sheets. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is a bed sheet that has been kept in a cooler of ice cold water. You would then swaddle your heat casualty in this sheet. We don't do this anymore. This will 9 times out of 10 lead to reflex hypothermia. So now we've got the body going like a yo-yo, and we've just made our situation worse because we can't treat both at the same time because we're trying to go in 2 different directions. So no ice sheets, but we do want to get into active cooling. So we want to make sure that we're fanning them. We want to make sure that we've got the ice packs on their neck, armpits, and groin. If you've got some room temperature water and want to pour it over them and they're okay with it, go for it. We need to be doing vital sign checks every couple of minutes. We need to call 911. This is a medical emergency. They need to be in an ER for definitive care. This cannot be fixed in the field.